Welcome. We are live from Pebble Hill, the historic Scott Yarborough House in Auburn, home of the Caroline Marshall Drawn Center for the Arts and Humanities in the College of Liberal Arts at Auburn University. This is Mark Wilson, and today I'm joined at a safe physical distance by Dr. Bernard LaFayette Jr., civil rights icon and Breeden eminent visiting professor at Auburn University. Welcome, Dr. LaFayette. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and for sure, these are uncertain times. One way we draw strength as humans is to look back at other troubling times and tell stories of human resilience. Throughout your life journey of nonviolence during the 1960s and beyond, you encountered more than a few challenging episodes. You were one of the coordinators of the Nashville Lunch Counter Sit-ins, a freedom rider, organizer of the voter education and registration campaign in Selma, national coordinator of the Poor People's Campaign. You've trained people in nonviolence around the world, oftentimes in some very dangerous situations. So thanks for being here to share with us stories of human resilience. The freedom rides in particular were challenging for those who participated. Could you tell us about your participation in the freedom rides?
Yes, I'll be glad to, and thank you for this opportunity to share. And it's very important for me to do this because as I get older, my memory sometimes deprive me of the opportunity to really share these things. But I'm glad I'm still able to do that. Well, one of the things that I experienced when I was in Nashville was the sit-ins. We decided what we were going to do after being trained by James Lawson Jr. And he came to Nashville and he gathered up the leaders from the various campuses in Nashville. And that included the white campuses like Vanderbilt and Peabody. Those students also participated in the sit-ins with us in Nashville, and they were part of the training. So it was people like Diane Nash, and there was Jim Bevel, and of course John Lewis, who was one of the people from American Baptist Theological Seminary. And we gathered leaders from the various campuses, leaders of fraternities and sororities, student body presidents, that kind of thing, etc. And as a result of the training, we then began to start participating in the sit-ins. Our first actual direct action when we went down was not in protest. We had sit-ins, but they were there to test the situation. We did not protest, we just simply test. And when we got an idea of how people were going to respond to us, we returned to the church and where we were doing our workshops, and we actually, you might say, role play. And the role play was for the purpose of preparing our emotions so that we went through the actual simulation of what would happen so that we would not be surprised or shocked by anything, that we were ready to receive whatever came down. So our first demonstration was actually, testing and that sort of thing. Then we had a march in support of the Greensboro group. But the first violence that I experienced on in the sit-ins, as I think about it, was actually at one of the smaller stores. It wasn't a department store, but it was mainly one of these, well, I just might as well say now, Crystal Hamburger place, okay. And it was very unusual because we went in there and we sat in. John Lewis was there, Marianne Morgan, and Marianne Morgan was actually a nursing student from Vanderbilt University. So we had different people participating in the sit-ins. The waitress in this the hamburger place locked the doors since we wouldn't leave. She started using water hose. She said, I have to, and this is in the noon hour now. She said, well, I have to clean this place. I can't let this place go like this. She started putting water all over us. And I remember Mary Ann Morgan had a fur coat. And she actually got this water hose and wet this woman's fur coat. And she poured water over all of us. And she said, I got to get this place clean. And she was just very fanatical about it. In fact, she got some fumigators things and started pouring this disinfectant stuff on us as if we were the dirty part of the eating place. And I remember there was a white fella outside and we saw these fumes. He just went wild and tried to break in the place because he was disturbed by these fumes flying around in there. We later found out that he was Jewish and he was reminded of the punishment that the Jews went through, and he was assuming they were gas that they were putting us in. And he just went wild and started trying to break in the front door. I remember that. So that was an interesting thing about violence. But we sat there and we were prepared, and they finally opened up the door and asked us to leave. And of course, we had made our point, so we left. But that was one of the first violent experiences that we had there in Nashville. The other experience in Nashville was one where we had desegregated the lunch counters, and they had agreed. And the Greyhound bus station was downtown, and we had lunch counters, so we included them in our sit-ins. So when we agreed and negotiated with the mayor to desegregate the lunch counters downtown, it included the bus station. But of course, by desegregating the lunch counters, we also desegregated the waiting room, okay, the restrooms, so the entire bus station itself was desegregated. But we learned later that the manager was sending the older black women around through the alley, through the kitchen, and they were eating in a porcelain table. And we thought that was just horrible for them to be discriminatory against older black women. So we decided what we're going to do is confront him, and we did. And when we confronted this manager, he said, oh no, I told all my staff people that, they could let everybody sit wherever they want to. And we had classes and that kind of thing, and we did all this movement and sit-in stuff and demonstrations and going to jail while we were also students. And we had classes when we weren't in jail, and then we had classes when we were in jail. But anyway, I told the manager, I said, look, we don't have time to go through all of this nonsense. I said, do you see this white fellow sitting over here on this lunch counter stool? And the manager turned around and looked, and sure enough, there was a young white fellow sitting there. I said, he's with us. He's the one that told us everything you were doing. And the manager just gasped, because he had no idea that a white person would, be the informant and observant and give us information like that. So we told him we're going to have all night sit-in because we want to make our point, because all the other places were desegregated. We weren't having any problems, even the train station. So we had an all-night sit-in. Well, long story short, once we got there, we carried our books and everything, and the manager turned out the lights, locked the doors, put tape on the refrigerators, as if we're going to cook our own food. So we, about 5:30 the next morning, we decided we were going to call back to the dormitory and get a ride so we can get ready for our classes, because we'd already made our point. Well, lo and behold, as I got into the waiting room, they locked the door behind me to the lunch counters. And there was this swinging door for the telephone booth. And this, I was in there, the phone was ringing, because I was called in a phone booth in one of our dormitory hallways. And this cab driver, who'd been out there all night giving us the finger, came in and kicked the door open, put a headlock on me and pulled me out of the phone booth while the phone was ringing and hanging loose off the hook, and pulled me outside of the bus station doors. And there were about 12 cab drivers waiting out there, and they proceeded to beat me. They knocked me down and they kicked me on the ground. And every time they would knock me down, I would get back up again and look right at them in the face. We're trained in nonviolence that you have to try to reach the soul and conscience of your opponent, even when your opponent is acting in a violent way, that the best response is to show another way. So I stood and looked at the person who was beating me up and the others who were joining in, kicking me and that sort of thing. And every time they would knock me down, I would get back up again and look at them. And I did this about 3 or 4 times. And they said, "Let's catch him, catch him." Well, I wasn't running, so they couldn't catch me. So I stood there and looked at them. They were out of breath. Well, I started brushing off my coat, my trench coat, because I had a beige trench coat and it was all dirty, and I even wiped the shoe print off my face where they had kicked me in the face while I was down on the ground. And my struggle was struggling back to my feet and looking at them. My real challenge was trying to find their eyes because I wanted to see them. And I was really searching to find out what were they looking at when they saw me that caused them to behave that way. So I was searching for their soul. And they stood there and they say, they didn't know what to do. So they were just out of breath. And I was standing there very calmly. And I said to them, "Gentlemen, if you will excuse me, I need to finish my phone call." They stood there in silence. Now, this is a theory behind this in our training in nonviolence with Jim Lawson, that unusual but genuine behavior has the potential to arrest the conscience of your assailant. So I learned that in our training, so I had a chance to really experiment with it and to see how it worked. So I really, had this unusual opportunity. So I said, "Please excuse me, gentlemen," and I start walking away to go back inside to make my phone call. Well, as I went there, the police came across the street and arrested me, and the young one said, "Well, what are we going to charge him with?" So the older policeman told him, "Well, for fighting, what do you think we're going to charge him with?" So we walked along, and he said, "Well, who are we going to say he was fighting with? Because you can't just be arresting somebody for fighting by themselves, like that." So he said, "Go get one of them." So the older man told me to go get one. So he got another fellow who was actually the one in the middle of the group that was fighting, the one that dragged me out of the, bus station. So when he got in the paddy wagon with me, he just balled up and put his hands across his face, and he was so nervous and scared. So I told him, "Hey, I'm the same inside, as I am on the outside." So I was letting him know that even though we were in the paddy wagon, my behavior was not going to change because there were only two of us there. So when we got down to the police station, my fellow Freedom Rider, sit-in people came and got me and put up the bond. And then we also put up his bond. So, because there was nobody there to get him out of jail. So the concept is that you treat people like you want them to treat you, and you show that example. So that was one of the incidents that I had when I was in the sit-in movement.
Well, and it seems like every chapter of your experience prepared you for the next chapter of experience. And so how did that strategy of using unusual but genuine behavior, how did that work in the next chapter of the Freedom Rides, maybe even when you found yourself in jail?
Well, the next thing we did was to continue the Freedom Rides after the Freedom Rides were stopped with the bus burning in Anderson, Alabama, and beating people and arresting them in Birmingham. We decided in Nashville to continue the Freedom Rides. John Lewis was on the original Freedom Rides out of Washington, D.C., and had temporarily gotten off. But he had all the information and our stops and contacts along the way. Diane Nash was our spokesperson for the Nashville movement, and she agreed to be the spokesperson for the Freedom Rides of those of us out of Nashville. And so we decided to continue. And John Lewis led the first group, and I led the second group. The first group got beaten up. They got arrested, rather, in Birmingham for protective custody. That is, they protected them from being beaten up like they were before. And so I always say it's like arresting the banker so he wouldn't get robbed. Okay? Can't rob the banker if he's in jail. Okay. So anyway, once they got arrested, we continued the Freedom Rides, and we went by train and car, arrived there. And they wouldn't let us take a bus from Birmingham to Montgomery. Every time a bus would come and we would try to get on the bus, they wouldn't allow us to do that. The bus driver refused to drive. So I was sitting in the bus station, and I was in Birmingham, a white bus, the waiting room. And the white waiting room there, and we all were there. Even the whites were in the white waiting room, but they were all with us. The bus driver so we were Freedom Riders, and wouldn't let us get on the bus, wouldn't ride it. So we were there all night at the bus station. I fell asleep. And while I was asleep, the Klan came in to the bus station. This is the first time I saw, the Ku Klux Klan up front and, close, robes on. That's my first time I saw Robert Shelton, in person. He had a black robe on and huge serpent on the back of the robe. It's the Imperial Wizard. So I thought that was peculiar that all the rest of them wore white robes and he wore a black robe, and we're talking about a black and white situation. But, his choice of robe was black. And so the way I saw the Klan was that one of them got some water, cold water, and threw in my face while I was asleep. And I woke up stunned, and I thought I was dreaming at first. And I looked up, and sure enough, live, okay, Klansman, hood thrown back, face to face. So I looked at him, and he looked at me, waiting to get my reaction, because I was frantic when I eyes open, and I saw the Klan members standing up there, and they were all over the bus station. So I looked at him, and he looked at me, waiting for my response. And I told him, I said, "Thank you." And he was stunned. He didn't know what to do. But I appreciated him, throwing the water on me, keeping me awake, especially with all those Klan members around there. I didn't need to be asleep. But that was not his intention, to help me at all. He wanted me to wake up, but not, with any appreciation. So anyway, that was another response in a situation. You always have a choice of how you're going to respond. That's the main thing. You may not have a choice of what people are going to do to you or say to you, or circumstances you're going to be faced with. You may not have a choice. Okay? As you go through life, you think about, you make many choices, but some of the major choices in life, it's not your decision. Like where you were going to be born, when you were going, like what century you're going to be born in, okay, and all that kind of stuff. Ethnic group, no, decide that. No, you don't decide who your parents are going to be. No, you don't decide that. A lot of decisions don't make. And you definitely don't make a decision as when you're going to die. But when you wake up every morning, you do have some choices. And those are not a lot of multiple choices, but you do have some. And you make those choices, you live with them. And that's the key thing in life. How do you live with those choices that you make? And how do you make something out of those choices? What do you make out of those choices? So, as we go through these experiences, like at the bus station, I had a choice between getting angry and upset and fussing at the Klan member, okay, and getting angry with the, or I could show the Klan member an unexpected response that was a positive response. And I made the Klan member do something positive when he intended to do something negative. Because the response you get from what you do determines whether it's positive or negative. It's the response that you get. So I gave him a positive response and gave him the impression that he was doing a positive thing. And that was not his original intention. So you have the power. That's the point.
Sometimes those responses would include music and songs. What was the role of music in some of those situations? What was the role of singing? What was the role of creating songs to get through the situation?
Well, one of the things we do have the ability to do, and that is to communicate and to sing and talk and lecture and continue to stimulate each other. And what's more important in situations that tend to has the potential for violence is that you have a peaceful soul. And the way you get a peaceful soul is through music, vibrations of your vocal cords, and being able to hear that music and also make that music. That's one of the things that we have available to us, and that is being able to stimulate our souls. And by doing that to ourselves, the most important thing about music is that we not only bring the best out of ourselves, but we also help others to bring the best out of themselves when we give music. And, some people say, well, I can't sing, I'm not. No, to be honest with you, I've been recorded. Okay, I'm saying at Carnegie Hall. My confession is I don't know what a middle C looks like. So it's not your cognitive knowledge of notes, but it's your ability to vibrate your vocal cords and stimulate your soul and the soul of others. So in jail, that's what we did. In fact, I remember the first day we were in jail in the city jail in Jackson, Mississippi on the Freedom Rides. There were 3 of us in the same cell block, and we were part of a quartet that had an opportunity to sing at Carnegie Hall. We were from the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville. That was Joe Carter, and that was who was from Brooklyn, New York, and Jim Bevel, who's from Ilabena, Mississippi, and myself. And the other one was from Florida, but he was not on the Freedom Rides. So that quartet went to Carnegie Hall. We sang with Guy Carawan and a lady we called Peter, Paul, and Mary, with Mary before she even joined up with Peter and Paul. Okay, there in New York. And we had the trio from Montgomery, the Montgomery trio, some little young girls who also was invited by Guy Carawan. We sang there. So we were in jail together, 3 of us in the quartet, and we just broke out and started singing the first day. The jailer came and said, all right, give me that radio. So he thought that, we actually snuck a radio in jail. And they were very upset because they're supposed to be good at searching people and making sure they don't have it. So Bevel's response was to the jailer now in Mississippi. He said, we're not going to give you our radio. How are you going to tell the jailer, and you're an inmate, that you're not going to give him your radio? So he said, I'd be doggone. And so he went and he got about 10 other staff people with billy clubs and stuff and guns and things. And they started opening up the cell door because they were going to come in and beat us up until we give up the radio. I said, Bevel, and I did this many times through our whole career, don't do that. That isn't necessary, That's not going to do us any good at all to get beaten up over some radio that we don't have. So I said, wait a minute. Bevel said, all right, we'll give you the radio. I didn't even know what Bevel was going to do. So he said, all right, let's give him the radio. Let's start singing. So we started singing, Buses are a-coming, oh yes. Buses are a-coming, oh yes. Buses are a-coming, buses are a-coming, buses are a-coming, oh yes. The jailer was stunned. And my only prayer was that we would sound as good the second time as we did the first time. So he'd know that was the same radio, okay? So, and the jailer just was stunned because they knew that was what they heard the first time. So they got really excited about it. So they ended up having, taking our mattress and all that, because they had to take that positive thing that we laid on them and react in a very negative way. And we continued to give them the mattress and give them whatever they wanted to, but we didn't stop singing. And they actually enjoyed the singing, okay, all the way. We got to the county jail, the warden, that's what he did at night. Everything was quiet, lights out, okay? And he was up there at the warden and look at black and white television, with coat hanger as the, antenna. And then he would send the trustee out to get him ice cream. Trustee was an inmate, but, not like the trustees of boards and stuff, these were inmates. And they were trusted to go and come back. So he would get ice cream for himself. And then he got excited about our singing and entertaining until he went and started getting ice cream for us. The jailer, the warden, would send out another inmate, okay, to get us ice cream at night. And so we got ice cream every night. We're in county jail. So it was a pretty interesting experience being in jail, in Mississippi. And in fact, we got overcrowded there in the city jail, and they put us in the county jail. And then when they got overcrowded, they sent us out to Raymond, Mississippi. I'll never forget, they sent us out there early in the morning. We had to get up by 4 o'clock and go out to Raymond, Mississippi. And when we got out there, we got interrogated by the warden out there. It was in another county. And what happened is that the warden started interrogating us and wanted us to say yes, sir, and no, sir. And so what happened is that this girl from Louisiana got slapped because she wouldn't say yes, sir. So we all said, okay, if you're going to slap her, then none of us are going to say yes, sir. So they got one of the ministers to try to go and get us to say yes, sir, and he had been to the military or something. He said, well, this is just a formality. It doesn't have anything to do with being black or white or whatever, just because the person's in charge. We just say yes, sir, that kind of thing. So we don't take it personally. So we said, well, he slapped her. So everybody agreed. So I had Leroy Wright in my cell. It was the last cell. So they slapped everybody, hit across the head, with blackjacks and stuff because they wouldn't say yes, sir, no, sir, refuse. When they got to Leroy was one of those, he was a tall guy and he was very much involved in the movement in terms of, being very stubborn about things. And he refused to say, yes, sir, no, sir. And when he did, they started the deputy started, and he jumped up, and he was taller than all of them. And he said, you better not hit me. He turned around as if he was going to physically fight with them. And they were terrified because they didn't have that kind of response, especially on the part of black folks, and they outnumbered, And by this time, see, we were the last cell, so he was exhausted. I mean, all of the warden and all of them, they'd gone through the whole cell block, beating on people. Mm. And Leroy didn't get hit. They turned him and said, you get out of here. So they just exhausted, tired. They didn't beat any more people. And they certainly didn't want to get hurt. And he looked like he was ready to strike back. And, that's not what they expected or what they had been, experiencing. So here I was, and I was supposed to be one of the leaders of the Nonviolent stuff. And I knew Leroy was strutting down the hall, and he said, they didn't hit me. So now, what's going to happen to Lafayette? What is he going to do? So Leroy was going to have bragging rights because he didn't say yes, sir, no, sir, and didn't get beaten. So, as I walked down the hall, I took my time because I needed time to think about what I was going to do. So, by the time I got to the warden's desk, and he asked me if I was from Nashville, and my response was that, yes, I was from Nashville. No, that was not my response. He said, "Are you from Nashville?" I said, "I'm from Nashville." He said, "Have you ever been to the military?" And that's a yes or no question there. I've never been to the military. So I repeated what he said without saying yes, sir, or no, sir. But I was answering the question. And they got thoroughly confused. And they'd just gone through this experience with Leroy. Right. So they say, "You get your black so-and-so out of here. Okay? With your smart A self." So because they were confused. Because it was unusual, but I genuinely answered the question. But they couldn't figure out what I didn't do wrong, because that was not what they expected. So again, it's unusual, but genuine behavior. But I struck their conscience in such a way until they couldn't figure out why I was able to break the pattern, but not, enough in the right way for them to respond the way they had earlier. So I was very calm with them and not belligerent. So it was just the opposite of Leroy Wright. He was very belligerent and resistant and very, angry. And I just did the opposite thing. Answered the question, very calm way. I didn't look like I expected them to hit me, because I didn't. Because I didn't, conform. All right? So that's another example in jail. And as I said, when we came back, we got ice cream and from the county jail and all that kind of stuff. And when I was thinking about it now in Parchman, it was something that we had to live with every day, and that is we were on death row. My first cellmate in Jackson, Mississippi, when we got there, was actually Stokey Carmichael. So we didn't sleep because we stayed up all night arguing about, the difference in nonviolence and, self-defense. And that was very good, way of entertaining. Then I had, the next cellmate was C.T. Vivian. Reverend C.T. Vivian would sometimes be my homiletics professor at the American Baptist Theological Seminary. So here I got my professor in the same cell with me. And we do puns. Our birthdays are one day apart. And one thing we have in common is we do puns. And we were going back and forth. And I remember the jailer came to get us to go to trial. And CT told him, said, "Just a minute, we need to finish this pun right here." And the jailer didn't know what to do because he was talking about puns. He never heard anything like that. Okay. So another cellmate I had was James Farmer. He was my cellmate in Parchman. James Farmer, who was the director of the Freedom Rides Court, the original rides. So we had a chance to visit. In his book, he mentioned me, Lil Gandhi. That's what he's talking about me in his book, yeah. So we had a very different kind of experience along the way. It doesn't mean that I didn't experience violence, but it's the way I responded that made me feel stronger.
And as you know, we've got many of your students and other friends from around the country and the world who are watching, and others will watch this video in the future. And we've got a couple of questions that have come in, one that relates to what you just said. Sherry Williams asked, was it more difficult to respond nonviolently when you witnessed friends and others you cared for being beaten or mistreated?
Now, that was another situation. It was on the Freedom Rides, actually, in Montgomery, Alabama. I was on the platform when they hit John Lewis on the head with a Coca-Cola crate. Okay? And that metal strip around the crate was a thing that caused that scar in his head. I remember that very clearly. And then Jim's word, when he was beaten and they knocked him over and they actually knocked him out the first time. They knocked him over the rail. He and I were talking about maybe 4 years ago. He wasn't aware that they had knocked him over the rail 4 more times. Because apparently the first time he was knocked unconscious, knocked his teeth out and everything else. I was there when they threw William Barbee down on the ground. He was a student at American Baptist College. And they put a Brogan shoe on his jaw while he was down on the ground and forced a lead pipe down his ear. One black man who was an older guy, who was just a regular pedestrian, he was walking down the street and they grabbed his cane from him, his walking cane, and took it and broke it across his head, knocked him to the ground. So I saw all this. Then they came after me and they planned to kick me in a certain part of my body, you know. And I went down to protect myself and they kicked me instead in the chest, broke 3 of my ribs. And when I went to the doctor, nothing you can do with broken ribs. So I went through the entire Freedom Rides, that whole period, 40 days, 49, 39 days, you know, all the way into Parchment. And none of the Freedom Riders knew that I had 3 broken ribs. Sometimes you have to learn how to accept suffering for the cause. And I didn't want them to be feeling sorry for me. So I learned to endure pain. I know how to.
And that it probably includes seeing your friends get hurt as well, because that's an emotional pain that affects everyone.
Absolutely. And I went to the hospital, you know, to see William Barbee, and he was on one floor, and was worried on another floor, because they had an integrated hospital, but they had separated floors, because that was part of the law. We wouldn't be on the same floor. And so we knew, and one of the things that was no question in my mind, because the question was always, after we endure this violence, like the bus burning in Amsterdam, are you going to continue the Freedom Rides? Because you're not going to get any protection from, you know, the government, even though they promise protection. How are you going to handle that? And you always risk losing lives. My greatest surprise is that on the Freedom Rides, that we didn't lose, you know, immediately any lives. Because we certainly had, somebody set a bus on fire, I think that they intend to, you know, take your life, especially when they hold the door.
So you were a college student. Others were college students. So one of your college students asked a question. When you and your fellow students were participating in all of these events, sit-ins, Freedom Rides, did you have any sense of what a significant part of history you were participating in?
Yes, I did. Frankly, we made out our wills. That was significant in the sense that, you know, there was a possibility that we would not survive the situation. We were very much aware of that. And we had to be prepared for it. The real difficult question we had to always keep in mind is that what were we going to do when that moment came? And more importantly, what do you do when your fellow freedom riders were attacked? How could you respond? And what did you do? And there are some things that we didn't know until we were faced with the moment. But we knew that we had to be prepared for that moment. So we had a song for everything. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. And what the Spirit says do, I'm gonna do, oh Lord, I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. So we were prepared for whatever faced us. And we felt that we would do the right thing.
Young people are out there, the next generation, you speak to them all the time. What do you want young people to know about participating in things that will change the world as you participated in?
One of the things that, and this would take a couple hours, so we don't have that much time. So the short of it is this. Always maintain control of your emotions. This does not say you don't have any emotions, but the main thing is stay in control. The next thing is always exemplify in your behavior, in your response to the violence, whether it's violence towards you or violence towards others. The goal that you're trying to achieve, that should always be reflective in your response. Then what you want to do is have your opponents see what you're trying to achieve, and it should be also for them. They should be able to see what you're trying to achieve for them, not just for yourself and for your others, but their others, their future, their children, their parents, and also help them to know that they are part of your cause. So, in your struggle to make that happen, you are preoccupied. So there's no room for violence on your part. The final thing is, the only way you lose is when you give up. And you must continue to strive towards your goals until you cannot strive any longer. When I was in Selma, Alabama, I was working on a voter registration campaign, and one night I came home from a mass meeting and I pulled up in front of my house, apartment building, and there were two white men and one in a car across the street, one under the hood, the other under the steering wheel. Well, it was not unusual because the rest of my neighborhood was white. But then as I was getting leaflets out of the back seat of my car, I heard these footprints coming up on me. I can hear the leaves cracking from the footsteps. And I knew that one of those guys was coming over there. So I quickly turned around and looked. And sure enough, he was a huge guy, crew cut, t-shirt rolled up on his shoulders and that sort of thing. I had to look up at him. He looked at me and said, "Buddy, how much you charge me to give me a push?" Oh, so I knew he was having car trouble, but what he needed was a push. I jumped in my car and pulled up behind him I had a 48 Chevrolet that Julian Bond had given me. Snake people, you know. This was 1963. I had a 48 Chevrolet. High bumper guards, all that kind of thing. So when I pulled up, this one of those fellows that was stooping down looking at the bumpers, and I rolled my window down. I said, "Well, do they match?" He said, "Well, maybe you ought to come out and take a look at them." So it was late at night, so I jumped out of my car and bent over and boom, hit me. I went flat down the middle of the street. So the whole scenario changed now. So I'm having to deal with not pushing a car, but I'm dealing with pulling every strength of my soul together now. So this was a greater push, not pushing a car. Okay? So it took more strength on my part. So I stood up and I looked at him. I raised my head, and he hauled off and hit me again. Went flat down in the middle of the street again. I wasn't thinking at all as to whether or not I would be knocked out or what, but I knew I had to resist. So I could not allow him to achieve his goal. I don't know where I got the strength where I got the strength. But I stood up even the third time, this time blood dripping down my eyelashes, and I couldn't even see him. But I knew where he was in front of me. And he jumped up. He jumped up off his feet and came down on my head. And I went straight down, rolled over, because I was expecting him to hit me, so I was rolling with the punch. And I rolled over, got back to my feet again. This time, I realized that he was hitting me with a gun. This was the butt of a gun that he was hitting me with, and now he had the gun drawn on me. And I realized that the next thing he was going to do was shoot me. And I had a neighbor who lived upstairs over my apartment building. We called him Red. He'd been to the military, Korea as well as Vietnam. And when he heard me call, I turned my back on the guy who had the gun on me, and I yelled, "Red, Red, Red!" Because I wanted somebody to witness, what happened to me. Red came across the banister with a rifle, and he was trying to get a beam on this guy. And Red was a marksman himself, so he could, get a pretty good shot. So I kept blocking him to protect the guy behind me who was going to shoot me. Because, I didn't want him to kill this guy, because Red was capable of doing that. So by protecting Red, the guy behind me, I was also protecting Red from shooting this man, because he would have been guilty of shooting somebody or killing them. The guy behind me, who had the gun drawn on me, he would have been hitting me on the head. I was trying to protect him because I didn't want him to get killed. By protecting the other people, I also was protecting myself in the final analysis. And so, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely that the guy behind me would shoot me because he would shoot his shield. I was shielding him. Okay? From red. Next thing I know, the guy jumped in the car and took off. Well, the short of it is the FBI came about a week or so later and explained to me that the whole situation had been planned in New Orleans. There was what he called a tri-state conspiracy. It was the same night that Medgar Evers was killed that this happened. In fact, I didn't know Medgar was killed until the next day, and I knew Medgar very well. Then the FBI continued to tell me that the other person who was scheduled to be killed was Ben Elton Cox, who was with CORE. He lived in Louisiana, and he was supposed to have been killed that night in front of his house. All three of us were supposed to have been killed in front of my house. People go home at night, so, okay. And he didn't come home that night, so therefore he wasn't killed, but he was on the schedule to be killed. So what they had planned when I decided that I was not going to charge anything for giving him a push, that he was going to knock me out, put me in the car, and take me down where a mob was waiting. And they were going to do what they call an Emmett Till on me. And that was the Alabama River right there. So the FBI agent from Mobile told me this. And so my response when the man came to get the push, he wanted to know how much he'd charge. In fact, I didn't charge anything. So they expected to pay me off once I got down there after giving them a push. By not charging anything, saved my life. Because he had to try to knock me out to get me down there, because otherwise I would, give him a push and keep going. So,
unusual but genuine behavior.
Yes.
These stories of human resilience are things that those of us watching and those who will watch this in the future cannot imagine. And so we appreciate your stories and your interpretation of those stories because it helps us understand how people can survive situations that seem pretty daunting. In our last minute, we find ourselves as a world right now in an interesting, unpredictable situation. What advice do you give to us?
Stay strong. Number one, don't give up. And let your behavior exemplify the goal that you're trying to reach. So you need to find a way to be the most supportive of others and help people have the strength. This is the time to have more communication with your friends and family members. Stay on the phone, okay? Talk back and forth. Get on the computer, whatever way you need to communicate. People need all of the reinforcement, and right now they need reinforcement of their souls. I know we have to have food, get food, okay, be cautious, follow good directions in terms of what we should do. Professional people who have experience and training in this. And I do believe that we'll overcome.
Thank you, Dr. Lafayette. Everyone, you heard the call to make a call. And so get on the phone and call someone. Share this video, which will be on Facebook. Dr. Lafayette, thank you.
Thank you.